So have I got a great video for you guys. We're going to be talking about the brand new 16-35 GM II versus the 16-35 PZ lens. And before you think, okay, well the GM II is obviously better, but we have to talk a little bit more about obviously price, features, the F2.8, and overall, is it going to be worth getting something like this that's almost twice the price as this? We got a lot to get through. Let's talk about the specs, then we can get right into it. So the 16-35 F2.8 GM is Sony's newest full-frame lens that replaces the ever so popular original 16-35 F2.8 GM. It has a wide constant aperture of f2.8 to an f22. It has two custom buttons, a manual focus to autofocus switch, an iris lock, the ability to switch the iris from clickable or declicked, a front filter thread of 82mm, and weighs a total of 546 grams. The 16-35 f4 PZ G lens is the newest update to the older 16-35 f4 G lens. It has an aperture of f4 to a f22. It has one custom button, a manual focus to autofocus switch, an iris lock, clickable or declicked iris ring, a power zoom rocker, a front filter thread of 72mm, and weighs a total of 354 grams. So right off the bat, we have to address the biggest thing in my opinion, and that comes down to the f2.8. Now it's a constant f2.8 through 16 and 35, and that could be a massive deal breaker when it comes to people who need to do interiors, low lights, obviously real estate agents, vloggers. An f2.8 against an f4 is pretty big. But with the low light performance of a lot of cameras these days, is it actually bigger than you would imagine? Now, can you get away with doing real estate videography with the 16-35 PZ? Like, is the f4 going to make a massive difference, especially when it comes to low light? So this is currently at f4 with ISO 640, and we changed it up to 12,800 and still at f4. And now we'll just bring it down to f8 just to equalize that exposure. Now, does this mean this slower f4 lens is going to be best for real estate? Well, the 2.8 does give you a little bit more versatility in that low light scenario, but like I'm trying to point here is that the Sony cameras are really good under low light situations where you can utilize higher ISO levels and still get clean, usable footage. And when you actually think about aperture and f2.8 versus f4, you also think about depth of field. Now, depth of field is more relative to the aperture and the distance to the subject. But these are both full frame lenses, so comparing the 2.8 against the f4 will be pretty interesting to see if it's actually worth it or not. So in real time, it's very difficult to distinguish the differences between an f2.8 lens and an f4 lens, as you can see right here. The biggest thing with an f2.8 over an f4 is that you have that ability to try and get a shallower depth of field, and it does give you that flexibility if you need an f2.8 as opposed to that smaller f4 aperture. Now you're thinking the GMaster's got the W in every single category, but hey, the price obviously is the biggest thing, but we'll talk about that soon. We're going to be talking about the PZ, so that's the power zoom in this thing, and the GM doesn't have power zoom. And if you have the FX3, FX30, and the FX6, they do have a zoom rocker on top, and also the ZV-E1 as well. That's got a zoom rocker, and that pairs with the PZ lenses actually quite well because you can zoom in nice and slow and nice and controlled, as opposed to just that manual zoom on the actual ring itself. So if that is a feature that you actually like, the PZ lens might actually be a really good option. And now also in saying that, the PZ lens is internal zoomed as well, whereas the GM II is externally zoomed. But what they did say is that when you zoom externally and you do have it on a gimbal, it doesn't actually change the balance. Interestingly, with the 16-35 GM II, apparently what Sony said that they've essentially created the elements inside to be even when you zoom out. So if you have it on a gimbal and the barrel extends, you won't actually have to rebalance the gimbal because the elements inside balanced directly in the center or something like that. And we're going to be testing it here, but I got kind of varying results. It's not 100% perfectly balanced when it zooms out, but it's still perfectly fine because the gimbal can handle it, no worries. So this is it balanced at 35mm, and then I'll zoom out to 16, and you can see it's actually slightly back heavy. Like, I mean slightly. We're talking a few
grams, and that's what will actually make it tilt. And then you can see there, it's nice and balanced when it comes to the 35 millimeters. Zoom it back out, and yeah.
It's a couple of grams actually back heavy, so it does actually rotate backwards, but we're talking a couple of grams. It's not going to put any added stress on your gimbal, and you definitely don't have to rebalance it. It's pretty much exactly what they say. So if we are to talk about focus breathing, well, we probably don't have to, because there is none when it comes to this lens. They've made this thing optically perfect that there is no focus breathing. But I mean, the same goes with the PZ lens. It actually has very, very minimal focus breathing, which it performs very good too. Now, when it comes to external build design and quality of the features, the GM II actually has 2 custom buttons as opposed to the single custom button on the G lens, and everything else is the same. You've got the autofocus to manual focus switch, you've got the iris lock, and then you can actually switch it to clicked or declicked as well. So it does have that aperture ring. And when it comes to, you know, the focus ring and the zoom ring, they are really nice and smooth. But the key factor between this focus ring and zoom ring is that the PZ lens is zoom by wire, so you can pretty much rotate this as much as you like, and it's not going to physically have a hard stop because it is by wire, as opposed to the 16-35 GM II. It does have that hard stop. Whether that's a big deal breaker or not, it just really depends. And like, if you did want to zoom nice and softly, you know exactly where those hard stops are, so you can actually see that on the lens, whereas you have to look at the screen to see what zoom length you're actually at in the PZ lens. Okay, now we have to talk about image quality, and the 16-35 GM Mark I wasn't amazing when it came to image quality. It was, you know, not incredibly sharp. It did have chromatic aberration and obviously a few other minor complications, but they've literally addressed that with this lens. This 16-35 GM Mark II is literally like perfect when it comes to the 16mm, when it comes to the 35mm, wide open at f2.8, incredibly sharp from center and pretty much to edge. The performance is amazing. Chromatic aberration is almost non-existent. The flaring on this thing, it's controlled extremely well. If you want a clinically sharp lens and perfect lens, the 16-35 GM Mark II is that lens. But in saying that, the 16-35 PZ lens is no slouch. Like, it is obviously an f4, so wide open. It's very sharp in the middle, pretty decent in the corners, through 16 and all the way up to 35. Like, it performs actually quite well. And obviously chromatic aberrations controlled quite well, and so is the flaring, as you can see right here. And also there is a little bit of a difference when it comes to close focusing distance. The GMaster lens actually focuses at 22 centimeters, whereas the PZ lens focuses at 24 centimeters, and then you can zoom and it goes to 28 centimeters. So it's not as close as the GMaster lens. And obviously because of that close focusing distance, you're able to get much closer with the GM, thus giving you a blurrier background. And especially with the faster f2.8, it will be even more blurrier than the f4 lens. Okay, now we have to talk about price, because this could be the biggest determining factor whether someone's going to be getting the PZ lens or the GM Mark II. Now the price of this is $3,999 Australian dollars. Now that is a premium price for this GMaster lens, and that's recommended retail price as well. And the recommended retail price of the 16-35 PZ lens is $1,599. So this is literally over twice the price of the PZ lens. Now, when it comes to the US prices, it's probably very similar when it comes to the value. This is going to be twice the amount as the PZ lens. But you have to consider, is this actually worth twice the amount of money? And if you are a working professional, some of these little features and little bits say obviously yes, because you're going to be making that money back. But if you are an enthusiast and you are maybe making a little bit of money, maybe you're a vlogger, the 16-35 GM Mark II might actually be a little too expensive. That's where you would probably choose the 16-35 PZ lens. Now, optically, they're almost identical. Obviously, the GMaster lenses has that GMaster quality, and This time is incredible. You know, breathing compensation done inside the lens, so there's pretty much no focus breathing. The image quality in terms of the center to the corner at f2.8. There's so many things that they've done right with this lens, but the price is that premium. But that's why a lot of the times I actually recommend the 16-35 PZ lens, because it just does so well in so many different situations. So overall, I really hope this video helped you in trying to make that decision. You just have to understand the pros and cons of each lens. Obviously the price, but the 16-35 GM Mark II is literally perfect. It's amazing, but you do have to pay that premium. Whereas, you know, the 16-35 f4 PZ lens is much cheaper, but you have to deal with, you know, the widest aperture is f4. And it is only PZ, so there's no hard stop. So there's a few things that you need to consider there, but hopefully this video has helped you making that decision. Anyway, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give it a thumbs up. That would be absolutely amazing. Thank you for subscribing to me, or thank you for just watching my videos in general. You guys are what makes these videos happen. And yeah, other than that, I'll see you in the next one. All right, let's get it.